The storm had rolled in faster than anyone expected, swallowing the quiet suburban street in a curtain of white. It was the kind of cold that bit through layers and stung the lungs with every breath. The kind of night where most people hurried inside and locked their doors. But Mark didn't. He was on his way home from work, stepping out of his car with the weight of a long day still on his shoulders, when he saw her, sitting on the front steps of the house across from his, snow clinging to her hair, her body hunched over as though the world had pushed her down and never let her stand up again. Everything about her, her trembling hands, her reddened eyes, the defeated slope of her shoulders, told a story he didn't yet know. And in that frozen moment, as flakes drifted down around her like falling ash, he realized with a jolt that she wasn't just cold. She was breaking. If you believe in kindness, compassion, and second chances, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps these stories reach those who might need them most. Mark didn't know her name yet, didn't know why she sat there with a backpack covered in snow, or why her face looked like she had cried until she had nothing left. All he knew was that something inside him refused to walk past her. He approached slowly, unsure if she would even acknowledge him, but when she lifted her swollen eyes, he saw something raw and fragile. Fear mixed with exhaustion, as though she had been fighting a war he couldn't see. She didn't speak, but she didn't tell him to go away either. And that was enough. He crouched down, the cold numbing his legs through his coat, and gently asked if she needed help. She only shook her head at first, wiping her face with gloved hands, but the movement was weak, almost defeated. Mark could tell she wasn't being honest with herself. She looked like someone who hadn't eaten properly in days, someone whose hope had worn thin from too many nights of uncertainty. The wind cut between them, carrying the sound of distant traffic and the restless groaning of the trees. This wasn't a place anyone would choose to sit unless they had nowhere else to go. Her name, he eventually learned, was Claire. She spoke it softly, as though even her identity was something she didn't feel she fully owned anymore. She wasn't from the neighborhood. She wasn't from the city. She had arrived only hours earlier, stepping off a bus with a trembling heart and a plan that had fallen apart before she even had the chance to breathe. Mark didn't press her. He only listened. And in return, something in her began to loosen, like a tight knot finally giving way under the warmth of someone's patience. As she explained what had happened, Mark felt his chest tighten. Claire had come to the city searching for refuge, escaping a painful home life she had endured for far too long. Her mother had remarried years earlier, and though Claire had tried to fit into the new family, she always felt like a shadow, unseen, unheard, and blamed for emotions she didn't create. Her stepfather, Mark soon realized, was a man who used intimidation as his language, and her mother had grown too weary and too dependent on him to protect her own daughter. When the tension escalated beyond what Claire could handle, she finally ran, hoping to start fresh with a distant relative who had promised help. But when she arrived, suitcase shaking in one hand and hope in the other, she learned the truth. The relative had moved away months ago without a word. Suddenly, she was alone in the city with nowhere to go, and the bitter cold didn't care about her fear. She wandered through unfamiliar streets until her legs gave out, finding the first porch she could sit on. That porch, by some twist of fate, was Mark's neighbor's. Mark felt something shift inside him as she spoke. Something protective. Something that refused to let her spend another second shivering in the snow. Without hesitation, he offered to let her warm up inside his home, assuring her she could leave anytime she wished. She looked startled at first, hesitant, but the desperation in her eyes overtook the fear. She nodded. Inside, the warmth of Mark's living room made her shiver even harder, as though her body was finally allowed to feel how cold it truly was. He gave her a blanket, a cup of hot tea, and space, something she wasn't used to receiving. She held the mug tightly, staring at the rising steam as though she could disappear into it. As the storm worsened outside, Mark sat nearby, giving her time. Slowly, she began sharing pieces of her past, not through dramatic outbursts, but through quiet, trembling sentences that carried heavy truths. She talked about missed birthdays, silent dinners, the fear of footsteps approaching her door, and the loneliness of never belonging anywhere. She had grown used to surviving, not living. And now, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't being yelled at or judged. She was being heard. Mark listened, not as someone trying to fix everything, but as someone who understood the weight of silence. He had once lost someone important too. His sister, who struggled for years with depression before disappearing from his life. He carried that guilt with him, always wondering if he could have done more. Seeing Claire trembling in front of him reopened that old wound, but it also sparked something new. A resolve not to let another lost soul slip through the cracks if he could help it. The hours passed. The storm finally softened. But Claire's fear didn't melt as quickly. She flinched at sudden sounds, apologized too often, and seemed to brace for anger that never came. Mark's heart ached at how conditioned she was to expect pain. He gently encouraged her to rest in the spare room, and though she hesitated, exhaustion won. She curled up under the covers like someone who had never known what safety felt like. When Mark checked on her hours later, she was still clutching the blanket tightly, as though it were the only thing holding her together. The next morning brought a clear sky, but a heaviness in Claire's chest. She had nowhere to go, no money, no plan. Mark didn't push her for decisions. Instead, he made breakfast and simply asked what she wanted, not what she thought she should do, not what others expected, but what she wanted. The question alone made her cry again. She wasn't used to being asked. She wasn't used to mattering. Over the next few days, Claire slowly began to breathe again. Mark helped her look into temporary shelters, community programs, and job opportunities. He never treated her like a burden, never acted as though her presence was inconvenient. Instead, he encouraged her to believe she could build something new in this city, something that belonged to her. And for the first time in years, Claire started to believe it too. Her progress wasn't instant. She battled panic attacks, sleepless nights, and waves of self-doubt that left her trembling. But every time she stumbled, Mark reminded her she had already survived the hardest chapters of her life. Slowly, she began rebuilding her confidence, piece by fragile piece. Weeks passed. Claire found part-time work at a local bakery where the owner, a kind woman named Helen, taught her not just how to bake but how to smile again. The warm sense of fresh bread and pastries became a comfort she didn't know she needed. She saved money, learned bus routes, and started attending therapy sessions offered through a local support program. She even began laughing again, softly at first, then fully, like someone rediscovering what joy sounded like. Through it all, Mark stayed in her corner, not as a savior, not as someone who wanted anything in return, but as a friend who believed she deserved a chance at a life that didn't hurt. Watching her grow stronger filled him with a quiet pride. And though they never spoke about romance, something deep and unspoken formed between them, a bond built on compassion, trust, and the kind of understanding that doesn't need words. Months later, on a warm spring afternoon, Claire stood on the same porch where Mark first found her. But this time, she wasn't crying. She wasn't broken. She was alive in a new way. Steady, hopeful, and ready for the future she once thought she didn't deserve. She looked at Mark with gratitude shining in her eyes, knowing that without his kindness, she would still be lost in the snow, fighting to hold on. Life hadn't magically fixed itself. She still had a long journey ahead. But now, she had a place to start. She had purpose. And she had someone who believed in her even when she didn't believe in herself. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful stories that bring hope and light to others. Before you go, comment below. What part of Claire's journey moved you the most?